If it weren't for the brave sacrifice that our men and women in uniform haven't already made, programs like mine on creativity, on even the ability to have a vision wouldn't even be possible. So it's with a debt of gratitude that I open with this first painting. But historically, my program's titled The Art of Vision. But given the fact of not only the theme of your conference, but the title of your commander-in-chief, your warrior's book, Doing the Impossible, I thought I would go ahead and open with something just a little bit different along those lines. Some people play the game, others change the way the game itself is being played. MJ! Thank you guys very much. Michael was one of those dudes. In fact, Phil Jackson, Michael's longtime coach at the Chicago Bulls, said about Jordan, he said, if you were to take away all of the glamour, all of the glitz, all the marketing, all the hype, he said Michael would have still dominated the game of basketball because of the mental edge that he had over the competition. In other words, specifically what he was referring to was his adaptive vision, his ability to be so engaged in the moment, so focused on the desired set of outcomes that he could take any number of different unpredictable best practices or operational efficiencies by which to be able to achieve that end goal, constantly keeping his competitors reeling on the defensive, not knowing which way he was going to go. And I think it's that exact same kind of adaptive vision that really the great artists of the past have used, the Picassos, the Michelangelos, Mozarts, the Jay-Z's of the world, have used to create breakthrough music or art, impossible art that no one had ever seen or experienced before. I think it's also that exact same kind of adaptive vision that the breakthrough entrepreneurs, the breakthrough athletes, the breakthrough community leaders are using to also transcend mediocrity, to be able to expand their mind in an effort to transform their life, in an effort to not only achieve, but to continue doing the impossible, expanding our definition of what success, what creativity, even what risk is going to look like going forward. So as an artist, I want to share with you how I guess continue tapping into that creative side, an effort to build a painting, a picture, an image that even has the potential to, I guess, differentiate from all the other great artwork out on the marketplace. But certainly, and I think more importantly, how you as entrepreneurs, as you as marketers, financial experts, even as community leaders, as husbands, wives, as parents, can also tap into a wealth of new ideas, creativity, innovation to plug back into your book of business, back into your community, back into your church, to be able to, again, grow your own dreams, challenge those, I guess, previously held assumptions, and break through to continue looking for opportunities to achieve and to do the impossible. So in looking at that, and I would say one of the greatest creative thinkers of our past ended up using that as almost a competitive advantage. Mr. Steve Jobs, in an effort to look at the future, he knew that oftentimes our greatest growth as individuals, our greatest growth as an organization takes place on the border between chaos and order, in exploring what is possible, what is truly a creative idea worth. I was coming down on a flight, actually here in Vegas. This was not too long ago. And I end up flying. I fly a lot over the course of a year, so it takes a lot to get me really rattled or shaken up. For those of you who flew in here to Vegas, you know there can sometimes be that kind of desert air pressure difference, right? Well, as we were coming down on this flight, Southwest Airlines flight, we experienced some of those crosswinds. And at the last second, the wings of the plane dipped. And then we kerned, and we came down, bam, bounced off the tarmac, came around, fish-tailed right before coming back down again. And people around me went white, hands digging into the seats, armrest in front of them. And immediately the captain, the leader for Southwest, comes on over the intercom, says, "Ladies and gentlemen, here at Southwest Airlines, you'll be delighted to know that there'll be no additional charge for that second landing." Immediately, hands loosened up. A couple folks did even almost chuckle as you did here, but I wondered at that point, I even still wonder at this point now, how many complaint letters did Southwest dodge as a result of that simple comment? That comment that's not in their policies and procedures manual, but that's because creativity, flexibility, adaptability. Doing the impossible is not a policy nor a procedure, but rather it is a culture. It's a culture by which Southwest founded their airline upon when they hired for attitude and then trained for skill. Now, please don't let your familiarity with that particular cliche dilute the gravity of what that's going to mean for the future of your business going forward. See, Southwest knew that they could intellectually, they could train their employees to do logically the end job that they needed them to do, the blocking and the tackling. But they also knew it would be far more difficult, if not maybe even impossible, to train them to have the attitude of flexibility, of adaptability to adjust to the almost certain onslaught of challenges and changes that were going to take place in their airline, maybe even in their own very industry that they didn't even yet know existed. But by building that into their core foundation, building that into their culture, building those emotional commitments and connections that truly are going to drive that future discretionary effort. Now, you guys certainly know that the way our mind is set up, the way it's designed, is we've got this left logic space in our mind and this right creative problem-solving space, yet particularly in our Western hemisphere, we exist in this left logic space well over 90% of the time because we do, as adults, as leaders, as persons of responsibility, we almost crave to exist in that world that makes sense, that's easily explainable, easily understandable, has mathematical, empirical, and even almost historical precedent by which to be able to refer to for all future decisions. We're naturally resistant to venturing out into that uncharted, can sometimes even be vulnerable right-brain problem-solving territory, but I also hold to the fact that it's not our fault. It's not our fault as adults, as leaders, as parents, because for the most part, I think we were all taught, even trained to become logical from the time that we all entered school. And a little bit of a side note here, but I think important nonetheless, is our school system, the way it stands today, now more so than even ever throughout history, has become maniacally, almost pathologically obsessed with linear, data-driven, one-dimensional, standardized right answers. Because even from the time that we all entered school, we were taught to take all those wonderful, different, cool, multi-dimensional type ideas and solutions, and then trained to narrow them down to search for just one correct answer, one proper solution that everyone else sitting in straight rows also came up with that just one solo response. And I think that got a little worse. We became adults or entered positions of responsibility or leadership because on top of that, we were taught to become operationally efficient. We were taught to become increasingly logical. We were taught what was possible, what was expected. And I think it's created almost that life of paradox. When we think about doing the impossible, it's oftentimes because we've limited ourselves to simply doing what we conceive or have been taught is possible. I think the art of doing the impossible is maybe even firmly couched in the science of reprogramming our mind, the science and the discipline of intentionally slowing down, stepping back, looking at these challenges, these frustrations, this political gridlock, this breakdown, the regulatory challenges, the economic challenges, the competitive challenges, and being able to look at them from a little different perspective, look at them and embrace them almost as an opportunity to go on the offensive. Now, certainly let me also pause for clarity, because the development of that left linear logical space in our mind still absolutely necessary. In fact, it's 100% categorically necessary, but I would suggest no longer sufficient. No longer sufficient by which to engage in these increasingly competitive, rapidly changing global economic times. I think we need to come up with new and different ideas if we are going to look at the art of doing the impossible. Look at some of these challenges and frustrations, maybe even from a little different perspective, looking at what maybe some people see as obstacles, some people see as setbacks, and be able to imagine them from a little different light.
Above us, only sky. Imagine all that. and the world will be as one.
I think we are capable oftentimes of so much more than we've preconditioned ourselves for. I guess one thing that I would want you to know about me personally is that I've not always been an artist. In fact, I just started painting for the very first time after I turned 30 years old. Now, I knew as a kid, I knew as a little boy that I enjoyed painting, that I enjoyed drawing, that I enjoyed the arts, but unfortunately I was told flat out by actually one of my fourth grade teachers that I was not a very good artist because I didn't color within the lines. Because I went too fast, because I didn't pay attention to detail, because I didn't draw the red apple red and the orange pumpkin orange. Unfortunately, I listened to her and I quit. And I set down my paintbrush and I didn't pick them up again for another 20 years. And as I went through what was at that point the academic blueprint for success, at that point it was called a little bit different than standardized testing, but this idea of what was possible academically, I became practically an impenetrable facade of no nonsense, business-like seriousness. I didn't have time for stuff like creativity. I didn't have time for stuff like the arts. To me, that all almost seemed frivolous or silly. I didn't like silly. Silly had no Dun & Bradstreet AAA bond rating that I could refer to for return on investment. And so it wasn't until a series of events that happened in my own life, both personally as well as professionally, following the tragic events of 9/11, that my business went into a financial freefall. And I lost everything, and it was gut-wrenching. Because everything that I had done, everything that I had been about, everything that was explained to me about what it meant to be successful, all of a sudden I felt like was taken from me. And looking back, I think as I do look back, what disgusts me the most is somehow, somewhere along the way, I allowed my net worth to be directly tied to my self-worth. And as one evaporated, so did two go the other. And I was left at that point with what I almost felt was nothing. And as I struggled with this nightmare of a paradigm that I had, in fairness, created for myself, but as I was struggling with this internally, trying to decide what next, a friend of mine who is a behavioral psychologist, he recommended that I go and that I disconnect, that I need to step away, and he recommended that I travel. Or maybe that I do something as a cathartic release, maybe something that I enjoyed doing as a kid, like painting or drawing. Well, unfortunately, I'd lost virtually everything that I had. I didn't have any disposable income by which to go and to go find myself. So it was maybe possibly by default, more than anything else, in an effort to placate him, that I went and bought some paint and some brushes and just kind of slipped into my garage and started fiddling around. But it was at that point of physically putting paint on canvas that all of a sudden the right side of my mind, that side that had been closed, even almost dormant for so long, all of a sudden began to open up again. And I began to see a lot of these challenges that were taking place in my life differently. In fact, I began to see even a lot of those core formulas on what I had decided was possible, those core formulas that I'd worked so hard to memorize in business school, began to see them from a little different perspective. And that's really where this presentation was born from. Now, certainly, please don't mistake this as a battle cry for everyone to quit your positions as leaders within PHP and grab paintbrushes and start splashing around the country. Frankly, I don't need the competition. But what it is a reminder that concept of creativity, that concept of doing the impossible, I think has been wrongly diagnosed as a genetic trait that maybe you were born with or without. But no, what I've come to realize, what I've come to experience in my own life, is that it is a learned and practiced and disciplined skill that every single one of us in this room has an opportunity by which to be able to tap into, not just to tap into, but also to plug back into your customers, to your clients, to your community, back into your own kids. So no longer is the question, who here is an artist or who here is creative. I think deep down, we've all known the answer to that since we were little kids. I think the question for tonight, the question for this year's banquet, I think is how. How are you going to reawaken that childlike imagination? How are you going to reignite your own artistry by which to be able to tap into and to expand your definition of possible and begin doing the impossible? And this idea of doing the impossible still might feel like it's a little bit of an ethereal concept. And as you're being pressured to continually do more and more with less and less, as maybe others say you can't, how do we continue finding that source of energy? Coming from a background as an artist, I would suggest that we need to go back and we need to study the masters. However, by masters, I'm referring to those who are unbound, maybe even unhindered by past experience or knowledge or the knowledge of what is possible. And I think there's no purer form or example than that of our kids. I think in a lot of ways, we as adults, we as professionals and leaders and financial experts can benefit greatly from going back and getting a PhD in kids, becoming an apprentice at the feet of our children. And maybe we should flip the tables on them. And we as moms and dads and aunts and uncles and friends, maybe we should be constantly asking them why. Why did the stock market capitulate? Why did we get bogged down by this subprime lending debacle? Why is our country at such political odds in shackling our mentality to push America forward? Why in this day and age of bigger, better, faster, stronger, always looking for the next technological advantage that's going to save us so much time? Why are we still so tired? I'm convinced their answers would surprise us. In fact, I'm convinced that if maybe even we brought our political challenges, our economic challenges, our competitive challenges to our kids in defining what is possible, I think their answers would surprise us, because our eyes as adults, as leaders, as persons of responsibility, have been firmly entrenched in defining, clearly what is possible. But their eyes are still the moonlight of imagination through which ideas and the impossible can pour. And what my introduction, even last year, when I had the opportunity to share, what many of you don't know about me is far and away what I would share with you is the most important thing in my life, and that is that first and foremost, I am a husband and a father. I'm a dad to 3 boys, all crammed less than 3 years apart. So as my wife, Tasha, who is somewhere here tonight, and I would agree, or maybe even more readily admit, notice this was not a program on strategic time management. But my boys, Patrick, Jennifer, as you guys are getting ready to have your first in the next 10 days, my boys, they have been my research pool. They are my constant source about learning and then even unlearning about creativity, about what is possible. They've given me a whole new set of spectacles, a new set of lenses by which to see the world again, maybe even for the first time. And so, as we're coming along this, and as I get the opportunity to share throughout the country, this idea of breakthrough thinking, this idea of rethinking what's possible, this idea of vision, it is truly a special opportunity for me, but still, it is most important to me that I ensure the survival of creativity and imagination and doing the impossible within my own family. And so to that degree, we have set up our own creative strategic development leadership workshops. My boys, of course, don't refer to it exactly like that, however. They actually call it AKA Crazy Daddy Time. This is where we take 20 minutes out of the day and we'll do things unconventionally. Sometimes with an air of inefficiency, sometimes even with reckless abandonment toward the creative process so that they are not bound by what I was unfortunately bound by in so many ways growing up. So that they have a place in the back of their mind that they can go, that they can come up with new and different ideas. So maybe they don't come up with all the exact same systematic answers as everyone else sitting in straight rows right around them. And maybe so they don't feel compelled to shackle themselves by what others say is possible and just become a marching ant in the game of life. And so in experiencing this in our little workshops, we will have costume contests, exclusively sponsored by Gillette Foamy Shaving Cream, where inevitably most of our characters end up looking an awful lot like Casper the Friendly Ghost. During Crazy Daddy Time, we will eat dinner. However, we will intentionally start backwards with the dessert first, where the only rule is you can't use your hands. Now, this one would crack you up if you saw it at my house. Boys, remember, there will be no vegetables until that cake is all gone. During Crazy Daddy Time, we'll head outside to paint. But of course, during that special time, paint can't always be confined to or just simply limited to the canvas. You see, I do now. As an adult, I've grown to embrace this idea of even silliness. As a strategist, as a business speaker, I've come to embrace this idea of even almost craziness because it wakes up the mind. It shakes up the brain cells to being able to look for different solutions, being able to continue growing your dreams and challenging those assumptions and breaking through preconceived barriers and notions. And my wife and I are continually stressing to our boys, stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be remarkable. Because this idea of breakthrough thinking, this idea of innovation, of imagination, of doing the impossible means a lot to me because one of my personal heroes subscribed to this theory. And although he in a lot of ways himself was labeled and even almost disabled because he was practically told flat out by the others, by the system, by the bureaucracy, that he would not be successful. He could not be successful because he didn't think exactly the way everyone else thought. He didn't act exactly the way everyone else was supposed to be acting. He went on to use that little bit of difference, that different way of seeing and even experiencing the world to create extraordinary opportunities by seeing what most people saw as barriers, what most people saw as possible, and being able to twist it through the use of innovation to achieve the impossible. Arguably, one of the greatest creative minds throughout all of history ended up saying this quote about what creativity and innovation meant to him. He said, creativity is really nothing more than seeing logically what the rest of the world around us physically sees with our eyes, but yet thinking what no one has ever thought before. I think that's exactly what the art of doing the impossible is going to look like for PHP going forward, to see what those around you see the challenges, see the setbacks, the perceived obstacles, but to have the courage, like Steve Jobs did, to twist that landscape. And to think like no one has ever thought before.